Now, welcome to the webinar with Professor Eleonora Mussino, Influences of Origin and Destination on Migrant Fertility. Now, this webinar is part of a series of migration seminars, New Approaches to Migration Theory and Research, organized by the Center of Migration Research at the University of Warsaw. And my name is Marta Kindler, and I will be moderating this meeting. Now, before I introduce our guest speaker, just a few technicalities. The webinar will last up to 1.5 hours. The presentation will be followed by a Q&A session, and you can write down during the presentation your questions or comments in the chat. I can read them out after the presentation, or you can place actually a plus in case you want to ask the question in person. Now, Eleonora Mussino is Associate Professor at the Stockholm University Demography Unit, and her studies contributed to the understanding of mechanisms underlying immigrant childbearing decisions on their contributions to a country's overall fertility rate. She also examined the provision of antenatal care and parental leave use of migrants and natives. And she's the author of the book, The Fertility of Foreign Women Resident in Italy. And she is also the author of numerous articles on fertility patterns of migrants. So we are delighted that you have accepted our invitation, and I'm looking forward to hear your presentation.
Thank you, Marta. Thank you all for coming and for inviting me. So you can see the slides, right? Just double checking. Yes. Today, I'm trying to give you an overview of one of my projects and zoom in two of the papers that came out from this project that I'm working the last 3 years. So first of all, I will try to convince you why it's important to study fertility of migrants. Birth of migrants help to ameliorate population age structure at the destination that would otherwise be even more dominated by the impact of aging and elderly. And parenthood is in general an indicator of the transition to the adult, and it's strongly influenced by the origin country norms and the destination country policy. And maybe even more importantly, for migrants researchers, the fertility preference and behaviors of migrants are one of the indicators of their cultural integration in the destination, and are also the results of their economic integration as well. What do we know so far? We generally know that at the destination, especially if we look at the OECD country, they have higher level of fertility. And this is generally explained by a theory called socialization, where the idea is that the fertility preference and behavior are formed during the childhood, so when they are still in the home country, and they reflect the preference of the home country at the destination. As well, another theory is the interrelation. So the idea is that fertility and migration are two interrelated phenomena and process. So this is why we find a peak of high fertility right after the migration. However, in most of the country, we saw also a convergence, a gradual reduction of fertility among migrants. And if this doesn't happen through the duration of stay, it might happen across generations. And this is generally explained with a theory called adaptation. However, we also see that the migrants have a different fertility compared to the origin. And in this sense, this is explained by the selectivity of migrants. And this could depend by observed characteristics like education, for example, or age structure that is different, but as well to unobserved characteristics like that are formed, like fertility preference as well. In few countries among the OECD, there is not been observed disruption. That is the fifth theory that generally we use to explain fertility of migrants, that assume that around the migration there could be a period of due by the stress of the mobility itself, and so see a peak of the fertility for then catch up over time. However, this literature almost exclusive focus on women, adult migrants, and migrants that come from high fertility origin to lower fertility destination. And another limitation is also that most of the study, even if it's changed over time, are mainly focused on many origin to a single destination. We saw some limitation on this approach. So the focus on adult migrants from high fertility origin has some limitation because they often migrants are migrating during their reproductive period, and as I say, there could be an interrelation between the fertility and the migration. So it's hard to understand what is the first step, what it's initiated, if it's the migration that initiated the fertility or the other way around. And also that if we look at the adults, could happen that they leave migrants, children already. They have children at the origin and they leave them behind. When we focus only on high to low fertility context, migration from high to low fertility context, we could give an incomplete picture of what is the reality of the migration. If we think, especially in the European context, how this changed with the enlargement of the EU, with Poland and Romania being migration country from migration to, for example, low fertility country like Italy or Spain. And also another limitation is that when we look at the migration from high to low fertility context, it's very difficult to understand if the convergence over time it's due by an adaptation or if it's due by the process of interrelation. So a peak at the beginning with less intensity over time. And if we think about only a single destination approach, this doesn't allow to account for the selectivity of migrants. Migrants' fertility behavior in terms of the similarity from the origin and the stayers are important factor to be considered. So the project wants to fill up part of this gap and surpass some of this limitation, looking on migrants from low fertility country to higher or equally low, looking at child migrants, so migrants that migrate as a children but before age 18, and having a multi-origin, multi-destination perspective and including also the stayers. And then we also add a gender perspective because most of the study are on women. We think that there is a gap also there in the literature. Of course, not all the paper look at all these aspects simultaneously, but overall the project wants to answer to some of the questions that are raised by this limitation. So why we look at low fertility origin? As I say, there is an increase of migration streams from low fertility origin in many destinations, as well as many of the origin are changing their fertility. So they are moving from high fertility country to as well low or even lowest fertility. And as well, they might be less likely than migrants from high fertility origin to have children before or in connection of the migration. So looking at migrants from low fertility origin can facilitate the testing of the adaptation from below to a net of the interrelation events. And patterns of decreasing fertility of migrants at longer duration of residence may be the results not anymore about the interrelation, but the adaptation can go in the other direction. So as you can see. Why should we be interested in looking at migrants as who migrate as a children? Migrants who arrive prior to reaching childbearing age can be studied in absence of what we call the causality or selective migration based on the link between fertility and family formation. So it's another way to distinguish the adaptation from the interrelation, for example. And if we look at different age when they come, we can also see the exposure that is different in the destination and at the origin. So focus as well on the adaptation. And why should we have a different methodological approach? looking at the influence of the same country of origin in the same destination will highlight the importance of cultural norm and practice from the origin versus the country versus the social and institutional norm of the destination. However, it's also possible that the migrants are selected group compared to the stayers. So it's important to put in the picture also as a comparative group, not only the non-migrants at the destination, but the stayers at the origin. And the last point, I thought few studies are starting to look also at men. The literature is quite scarce. And we could assume that the interrelation, for example, for men and women could play a different role. So I think they should be put in the picture as well. So today I go to present two papers, but I'm happy to talk more after during the discussion that try to test the adaptation with two different approaches. The first one, it's looking at the generation 1.5 from low fertility country in Sweden. And the second is to look at the different origin in different destination compared to the stayers. So there are two papers here today. Let's start with the first one. It's a collaboration with Gunnar Andersson and Ben Wilson, that are two researchers here with me at Stockholm University. And the title is The Fertility of Migrants from Low Fertility Settings, Adaptation in the Quantum and Tempo of Childbearing. So the current study focuses on tempo and quantum of childbearing for migrants from low fertility contexts in Sweden. And we focus on migrants who arrive at the destination as a children. And we aim to answer three research questions. The first is, how does the fertility of child migrants from low fertility origin country compare to the typical norm in Sweden? Is there an evidence of adaptation within and across generation, or lack of adaptation for quantum, tempo, or both? And how does this evidence change by country of origin? So this paper looks both quantum and tempo. The quantum of migrants' fertility, as I say, may play an important role on the aging society. For example, by reducing the dependency ratio for future working age cohorts. But also the tempo is important. Tempo, we know that giant migrants have an early childbirth. So the age of the first child is generally lower than the native at the destination. And this might be considered as a source of socioeconomic inequality with respect both of the mother and the children, because we know how this could lead up in a different outcome, negative outcome for both the mother in the labor market, but as well the children in education and so on. It follows that there are different motivations for studying either one or the other aspect, but what we notice is that rarely in the same study, they try to contrast both the results of the two processes. And so this paper tried to fill up the literature in this sense as well. Why Sweden? Sweden offers a compelling context for examining whether the woman can achieve the desired fertility. At least we could say that until the beginning of 2020. Now the fertility is dropped quite rapidly also in this country. But we have great detailed data. So we work with register, and so we can also include small country of origin. There is a great migrant variation. So we have migration from high fertility country and low fertility country. And it's quite a historical country of immigration, including exactly neighboring countries that have either equal or lower fertility. Again, at least by the time of this study, it was the setup of the immigration policy was based on the paradigm of multicultural. So the idea is that the migrants should be allowed to maintain and fulfill their norms in all the aspects of their life. And one example of the policy, it's the mother tongue. It's to children and pupils, it's provided free class of the mother tongue at school, because the idea is that you should cultivate your home origin country norms and culture. And then the Swedish welfare regime, it's well known to try to balance out family and work life through childcare, universal childcare, and very generous parental leave. We use the migrant trajectory register data, that is a collection of population register. This collection of data goes from the late 60s to 2017. But for this study, we look at women that were born from 1940 to 1976, so that we have a range of women from 40 to 76, because we want to see their complete fertility. And we include only women that did not immigrate or die before age 40. We use generalized linear models to analyze completed fertility. We use the Poisson link function, while for looking at the age of the first birth, we use the identity link function. And we additionally also run event history, a piecewise exponential model to study the transition to the first child. But yeah, we give more emphasis on the first two models because they are more comparable in the results. And then we control for birth course. So we define a migrant from low fertility country, migrants that come from country that in 2013 had a total fertility rate below 1.9. That was the level in Sweden, and that migrate in Sweden at the age younger than 18. But then in our model, we also distinguish between different age group. So if they migrate between 0 and 5, 6, 12, and 13, 17, and we compare them with the ancestral Swedes and the second generation. However, for the descriptive results, we also have some comparative results between adult migrants and child migrants, so the migrants that arrive 18 plus. And that is what I mean. So here it's the first figure where it shows the completed fertility compared to the average of the ancestral Swedes, that is the red dot line. And we have in blue the child migrants, so migrants arrived between 0 and 17, and all migrants that arrived between 18 and 35. And it's no surprise, consider that we look at migrants from low fertility countries, that most of the adult migrants have a lower completed fertility than the Swedes. What is interesting is to see, except for the former Yugoslavia and the migrants from Greece and Cyprus. What is interesting that is for most of the group, the migrants that arrive as a child are in between the two paths. That is much less clear when we look at the age of the first child, where we have country where especially for the adult migrants, the age of the first child is actually much later than the Swedes, and this could be due by the disruption of the migration, for example. So like they have to postpone because they were migrating or they were studying. But the results of this figure, it's more like what comes out is that the pattern is not clear. And so once again, we can discuss how difficult sometimes it's to look at fertility of migrants when we look at the first generation, because there is the disruptive, the interrelation, the selection, all that play a role in the process. So in the main model, we look at the age of the first child and the completed fertility for the child migrants, as I say, arrived in different age compared to the ancestral and the second generation. And the figure here, it's representing the age of the first birth. And we can see that the age of the first birth is frequently closer to the one of ancestral Swedes for child migrants if they arrive at younger age. So for example, you can see a clear pattern here. Can you see my mouse if I point?
Yes.
Okay. So you can see that if they arrive between 13 and 17, it's much lower than if they arrive at 612, that if they arrive at 05, that there is no significant difference with the ancestral. And we see this pattern in many groups, also for the Finnish, that are very predominant group in Sweden. Something in that direction, even if the interval of confidence it's overlapping with the reference category, also from Polish and so on. But of course, there are some exceptions. What we can also see is that there is, for many of the group, the second generation follows this trajectory, so it's in between, or there is no significant difference with the Swedes for what concerns age of the first child. While if we look at the completed fertility, again, the results are a little bit more mixed. So there is no clear evidence of fertility gradients, at least not clear as much we saw for the age of the first child. What happened often is that there is no difference between the group in completed fertility. And actually, another thing that it's been found for for second generation from high fertility country, also for second generation from low fertility country, we find a depressed fertility for the second generation. And if this was interpreted as an adaptation for the high fertility country origin, this cannot be interpreted in the same way for the low fertility country, otherwise the direction should be the other. So in summary, we find that age at migration is an important determinant of transition to parenthood for child migrants from low fertility country, and that there is considerable evidence of that adaptation for age at the first birth, so for the tempo, but not for the quantum, and very rarely both. And for the second generation, again, we find an adaptation for the tempo, but not for the quantum. And actually, instead of supporting an idea of adaptation across generation, what we find here is more in the direction of cultural enrichment kind of theory, so more on minority. So back to our research question, we see that for most of the low fertility origin, child migrants to have an average completed fertility higher than the adult, but the pattern compared to the second generation and the ancestral, it's not very clear. We also find, answering the second question, we find evidence of adaptation when looking at age of the first birth, but we cannot draw the same conclusion when we look at the quantum. And we found evidence that this adaptation for the tempo or the lack of adaptation for the quantum, it's different across different origins. By studying child migrants from low fertility origin, so we can show that how different exposure for the Swedish context, how much the different exposure to the Swedish context is related to the quantum and the tempo of childbearing. So it's important to distinguish the 1.5 generation from the adult and especially from the second generation. Sometimes they are put together in some study because they are a small group. Because this approach, we could ignore many potential explanations for fertility of migrants, like the interrelation on the selectivity, and focus more on the role of childhood socialization and adaptation. So that was the results of the first paper I wanted to present today. And I don't have idea how much I'm talking, so it's I continue.
You have time. No worries. You still have time. Yes.
I go on the second paper with a different co-author and completely different data and setup of the study. So this paper is written with Stefano Cantalini from the University of Milano and contributes to the debates of examining the quantum of childbearing migrants from low fertility contexts, in particular Poland and Romania, in multiple destinations, Italy and UK, so one with low fertility and one with relatively high for the European context. and comparing them to the stayers, so the Romanian and the Polish men and women that don't migrate. So the aim of this paper is to complement existing literature with giving an intra-European focus and giving a new methodological approach, so looking multiple origin with multiple destination combined to the stayers. Additionally, this paper also look at men that, as I mentioned before, rarely are included in the picture. And additionally, we also look at couple perspective. Due to the limitation of the data that I will present later, but I already put my hand on the front, we cannot really test the mechanism of the migration theory, the theory of fertility of migrants. But definitely we can contribute and discuss our results in relation to this with this theory. And so we build up our work on following on the fertility of migrants theory and creating hypotheses for that reason. So we expect that if socialization hypotheses apply, migrants should have similar fertility to the ones that stay in the country. And this should be true over the time. So it should not change. If we consider selection, then the fertility differential between origin and destination should decrease when we control for observable characteristics, such education, for example, or labor market attachment. However, we can generally expect that migrants' fertility to resemble the pattern of the destination country to a greater degree if there is selectivity driven by unobservable characteristic. According to adaptation, we expect fertility to increase over time since this migrants group come from low fertility country, and in particular in UK, where the destination has a higher fertility than in Italy. And also having a native partner, especially in UK, will drive up the fertility. According to the interrelation, we expect to see a decline trend in fertility by duration of stay. And we also expect that fertility, if migrants move together or they follow their spouse, could be higher at the destination. According to the disruption, we expect that Eastern European migrants to have a low fertility in the short period after migration, both in Italy and UK, and that however, the catch-up could take long. And we don't really have hypotheses on gender because there was very few up to the air, but we run models separate on gender and then also specifically on couple. We used the labor force survey. For Italy and UK, we took the national survey because we need to identify migrants from Poland and from Romania, while in the European labor force, the category is aggregated by macro area. So for the Italy and for UK, we went to the direct source, while for Poland and Romania, we took the already standardized European labor force. So we had to make less work to standardize. We include women aged 25-45 and men aged 25-50. And we look, our dependent variable is the number of children. As probably you all know, the labor force survey is not really the perfect survey to study fertility, but it was possible through the own children method to recollect all the children in the household and link with the parents and see how many children each parent has. And then the main independent variable, it's the geographical origin. So we have Polish stayer, Romanian stayer, Italians non-migrants, British non-migrants, and then we have the Polish migrants in Italy and UK, Romanian migrants in Italy, UK. We estimate a Poisson regression as well, stratified by gender and country of destination. And we control in the exposure of the Poisson, so the age, it's the exposure of the Poisson to correct the fact that the men and women could have different age. But we have additional control that are year of the survey. For model 1, education, it's added in model 2, and employment condition in model 3. And in the couple model, we also control additionally for the age of the partner. So this figure shows the difference in predicted number of children for Eastern European migrants compared the non-migrants in Italy and in UK, and compared to the stayers in Italy and UK for women and for men. There's a lot of information in every slide. I will try to go slow. So first, looking at the women, we can see that the difference with the non-migrants at the destination, the Eastern European migrants have a lower fertility, especially in UK, that we already mentioned has quite high fertility compared at the European level, compared to the European level. So Romanians have lower fertility in Italy and definitely in the UK. Poles have a quite low fertility in UK and slightly lower in Italy. What we can see also is that in the ones we control for education and for occupational level, the difference, especially for the Romanian, increase instead of decrease. If we look at the difference with the stayers, we see that Romanian don't have any significant difference with the migrants. The Romanian migrants in Italy don't have any difference with the stayers in Romania, while the migrants in UK are much higher fertility than in Romania, while for the Poles, the fertility is much lower than the stayers. For men, we find slightly different results. So, for example, Romanian men have a higher fertility compared to the Italian men in Italy. And women, Poles men have a not difference than the Brits in UK. And then what we find here, it's also that the Romanian in Italy have higher fertility than Romanian in the country of origin. So that it's more or less what we can read from these two pictures. Here we have again the predicted difference in children, in number of children, but by duration of stay. In this case, the reference is the non-migrants at the destination. So, while the dot line is the stayers as the origin, and so this can change. And then the main results are, like you can see, the migrants. So overall, concerning women, migrants' fertility increase over time of residence in both the destination. So this is Pole in Italy and Romanian in Italy, even if in a less degree for migrants in UK. Again, for the men, the evidence is a little bit more mixed. So we have, for example, Romanian that have the same kind of increase over time, and they even surpass the men in Italy. And we can see something similar in from Pole in UK and Romania in UK, while the Pole in Italy it's up and down. Overall, the results, if we include only individual and couple, are very coherent with the results that I already discussed. But overall, the migrant stayer gap, it's lower in both the short and the long term in Italy, especially for the Poles who privately move in the new country alone and then remain alone for longer time. And this is the last figure where we divide the group by type of migration. So the one that migrate alone, the one that migrate first, and then the partner comes after, the one that move together, the tied, the one that move, the one that follow, sorry, the migration, and the one that have a native partner. And women in a, okay, the first easy interpretation is to see that migrants that are alone, both men and women, have a much lower fertility. And that somehow is not surprising at least. So there is a kind of penalization for moving alone. While on the other side, the people that move in couple are the ones that often have either the higher fertility or among the highest. For Poles, the one that have a higher number of kids are the one that follow the husband, in this case for the woman. But sorry, as I said, this, the joint, it's the higher, and the tithe, it's the second one. I got confused in the label. And that we can also find that women in a mixed origin marriage are among those with the lowest fertility. For example, here for the Romanian in Italy, but even more for the Romanian and the Poles in UK. If we look at men, the gap between first migrants and native stayers is generally positive or not substantially relevant, because this group of migrants include first mover joined by their spouse after several years. The tithe and especially the joint movers have high fertility in all the contexts. Again. So trying to pull together all these results, in general, we showed that Polish and Romanian women have fewer children than non-migrants at the destination. And this is confirming study especially in UK, of fertility of Poles, especially in UK. Romanian migrants, migrant women, as well as men, also have fertility similar to that of the stayers at the origin, especially in UK, where patterns do not change over time spent in the destination country. So it's somehow more in line with what we define the socialization hypothesis. Among Romanian women, the socialization argument is also confirmed by the finding on mixed couple who exhibit fertility similar to the stayers at the origin. We also found relevant composition and selection effect. So the group were quite diverse by education and occupation, but despite of that, when we control, the results are quite consistent. Yes. And however, despite the relevance of the observable characteristics, it seems that the unobserved factor are the one that plays more a role in shaping the fertility of migrants. Our couple perspective allows us to find that family unification as the main sign of interrelation of event, also for this group. And this is confirmed by the high fertility of tithe movers. On the contrary, we found no evidence of declining trend in fertility for women with different duration of stay. Our findings suggest the presence of disruption mechanisms for migrants, especially in Italy. And this lower fertility increase with duration of stay seems consequently linked with more the disruption hypothesis rather than the adaptation. This would also explain why especially Poles have lower fertility compared both the non-migrants and the stayers. So this study is contributing to the research in three ways. First, the intra-European focus and the innovative perspective. Without the combination of multiple origin and multiple destination approach with the context of origin and looking at the migrants from low or relatively higher fertility country, would not have been possible to reach the same conclusion, especially regarding the role of the selection. Secondly, we find evidence of disruption for both origin, regardless the context in which they migrate, and this is quite new for the European context, where the disruption hypothesis is often put aside because not confirmed. And thirdly, we raise the potential of using the male and the couple perspective when looking at migrants. And this study, among all the things, show also that how couple experience does not negatively affect fertility despite the separation, even when they don't move together. And this was, the second paper that I decided to focus today, but This project was financed in end of 2018 and was supposed to run in 2019, 2022. But I got an extension because I had got a child myself. So it's actually been prolonged until the mid of next year. So I have other outcomes that have been published, but there are still more ideas that are on the air and I'm working. So if you want to know more about this project, I'm happy to talk. And if you have more ideas or want to collaborate, I'm even more happy to talk. And for who is not aware, we have a EAPS working group that looks at fertility and family dynamics in migrant and minority groups in Europe. And if you are not part of the network, but you want to know more, please contact me or sign in. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eleonora, for this very, very interesting talk. I will right now actually stop the recording.
And I stopped sharing so I can see your face.